The sky over the vast, indifferent blue of the Pacific Ocean was a canvas of terrifying beauty. December 7th, 1941, a date that would not only live in infamy, but would also mark the dawn of a new kind of warfare, one fought not on land or sea, but in the boundless theater of the air. For the American pilots stationed at Pearl Harbor, the morning began like any other, with the gentle Hawaiian sun warming the tarmac. But then, the drone appeared, a faint, almost imperceptible hum that grew into a menacing roar. Within moments, the sky was filled with them, sleek, impossibly agile aircraft bearing the crimson sun of the Empire of Japan. They were the Mitsubishi A6M, better known to the world as the Zero. And they were untouchable. American fighters, sluggish and heavy by comparison, were swatted from the sky like flies. The Zero danced and climbed, its cannons tearing through American steel with contemptuous ease. On the ground, ships burned, men died, and a myth was born. The myth of the Zero's invincibility. For the pilots of the Imperial Japanese Navy, they were the winged samurai, the undisputed masters of the sky. For the Allies, they were ghosts, phantoms that appeared from nowhere, dealt death, and vanished just as quickly. In the opening months of the war, the Zero carved a swath of destruction across the Pacific, achieving a staggering kill ratio, sometimes as high as 12-1. It seemed that for every Allied plane that went down in flames, a dozen more would follow. A sense of despair began to creep into the hearts of Allied commanders. How could they fight an enemy they couldn't even catch? The answer was not to be found in trying to match the Zero's strengths, but in exploiting its weaknesses. It was an answer that would be forged in the fires of defeat, born from the minds of brilliant engineers, and flown into battle by a new generation of American pilots. It was an answer that would take the form of a new kind of warplane, a machine built for one purpose and one purpose only: to hunt the Zero and drive it from the sky. This new aircraft was not as graceful, not as nimble. It was a brute, a powerful, heavily armed predator that would earn the fear and respect of its enemies. They called it the Hellcat. And when these two titans of the air finally met, the Pacific would bear witness to a duel of epic proportions. A clash that would not only determine the fate of the war in the air, but would forever change the face of aerial combat. This is the story of that duel, of the rise and fall of the Zero, the birth of the Hellcat, and the desperate, bloody struggle for control of the skies above the Pacific. To understand the epic confrontation between the Zero and the Hellcat, we must first journey back to a time before the first shots were fired, to a Japan in the throes of imperial ambition. In the 1930s, the Empire of Japan was a nation on the move, driven by a desire for resources and a belief in its own destiny. As its military might expanded across Asia, the need for a new generation of weapons became paramount. The Imperial Japanese Navy, in particular, recognized that the vast distances of the Pacific Ocean would require a new kind of fighter aircraft, one that could project power far from its carrier decks. In 1937, the Navy issued a set of demanding specifications for a new carrier-based fighter to replace the aging Mitsubishi A5M. The requirements were so ambitious that one of the competing manufacturers, Nakajima, deemed them impossible and withdrew from the competition. But at Mitsubishi, a brilliant young designer named Jiro Horikoshi believed he could achieve the impossible. Horikoshi and his team were tasked with creating an aircraft that possessed a seemingly contradictory set of attributes: the speed of a land-based fighter, the maneuverability of a biplane, and a range that was unheard of for a single-engine aircraft. To achieve this, Horikoshi made a series of radical design choices. The key to the Zero's performance lay in its extreme lightweight construction. Horikoshi utilized a new, top-secret aluminum alloy, and every non-essential component was stripped away. There was little to no armor protection for the pilot, and the fuel tanks were not self-sealing, a standard feature in most Allied aircraft. This made the Zero incredibly vulnerable to enemy fire, but it also gave it its legendary performance. Powered by a Nakajima Sakai radial engine, the Zero was a marvel of engineering. It was fast, incredibly agile, and possessed a phenomenal range that allowed it to escort bombers on long-range missions, a capability that no other carrier-based fighter in the world possessed at the time. When the A6M, officially designated the Type 0 carrier fighter, entered service in 1940, it was, without a doubt, the most advanced naval fighter in the world. Its pilots, trained in a grueling and highly selective program, were the elite of the Imperial Japanese Navy, men who had honed their skills in the skies over China. When Japan unleashed its fury on Pearl Harbor, the Zero was its spearhead. Allied pilots, flying outdated aircraft like the Brewster Buffalo and the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, were simply no match. The Zero could outturn, outclimb, and outmaneuver anything the Allies could put in the air. The shock of the Zero's superiority sent ripples of fear through the Allied command. A narrative of Japanese invincibility began to take hold, fueled by the seemingly endless string of victories in the early months of the war. In the early, dark days of the Pacific War, the skies belonged to the Zero. From the Philippines to the Dutch East Indies, the sleek Japanese fighter reigned supreme, a symbol of Japan's seemingly unstoppable advance. The pilots of the Imperial Japanese Navy, many of them seasoned veterans of the war in China, were a formidable force. Men like Saburo Sakai, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, and Toshio Ota became legends, their names synonymous with aerial prowess and a warrior spirit that seemed unbreakable. Sakai, in his memoirs, described the thrill of flying the Zero, the feeling of complete mastery over his machine. He spoke of the aircraft as an extension of his own body, responding to his slightest touch with a grace and agility that was breathtaking. This symbiosis between pilot and machine was a key factor in the Zero's early success. The Japanese pilots had a deep and abiding faith in their aircraft, and this confidence translated into a fearsome aggression in the air. For American pilots, their first encounters with the Zero were often their last. Flying aircraft like the Grumman F6F Wildcat, they found themselves at a severe disadvantage. The Wildcat was a rugged and well-armed fighter, but it was heavier and less maneuverable than the Zero. In a classic turning dogfight, the Wildcat stood little chance. The Zero could dance around its American adversary, its cannons and machine guns tearing into the Wildcat's vulnerable spots. The psychological impact on Allied pilots was profound. The Zero's reputation preceded it, and many young, inexperienced American flyers went into battle with a sense of dread. They had heard the stories, the accounts of entire squadrons being wiped out by a handful of Zeros. But amidst the despair, there were those who refused to be intimidated. Men like Lieutenant Commander John S. Jimmy of the United States Navy. Thack, a skilled and innovative tactician, recognized that trying to fight the Zero on its own terms was a recipe for disaster. Instead of engaging in turning dogfights, he developed a new tactic that would forever change the face of aerial combat. It was called the Thatch Weave. The concept was simple yet brilliant. Two American fighters would fly in formation, deliberately luring a Zero onto the tail of one of the aircraft. As the Zero closed in for the kill, the two American planes would turn towards each other, a move that seemed counterintuitive, even suicidal. But as the Zero followed its target through the turn, it would find itself directly in the sights of the other American fighter. The hunter had become the hunted. The Thatch Weave was first used to great effect at the Battle of the Coral Sea, and later at the Battle of Midway, where it helped to turn the tide of the air war. It was a tactic that relied not on the performance of the aircraft, but on teamwork, discipline, and a deep understanding of the enemy's weaknesses. And it was a sign that the Americans were learning, adapting, and fighting back. But even with the Thatch Weave, the Wildcat was still outclassed by the Zero. A new fighter was needed, an aircraft that could not only survive an encounter with the Zero, but could dominate it. That aircraft was already on the drawing boards at the Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation, a company that had earned the nickname the Iron Works for its rugged and reliable aircraft. The stage was being set for a new chapter in the Pacific Air War, a chapter that would be written in the skies by a new and deadly predator. The turning point in the Allies' understanding of the Zero came not in the heat of battle, but on a remote, fog-shrouded island in the Aleutians. In June of 1942, a young Japanese pilot, Tadayoshi Koga, was forced to make an emergency landing on Akutan Island after his Zero was damaged during a raid on Dutch Harbor. Koga, misjudging the soft tundra for solid ground, flipped his aircraft and was killed in the crash. His nearly intact Zero lay undiscovered for weeks until it was spotted by an American patrol plane. The discovery was a windfall of intelligence beyond the wildest dreams of Allied commanders. The Akutan Zero, as it came to be known, was carefully disassembled, crated, and shipped to the Naval Air Station in San Diego. There, it was painstakingly reassembled and put through a series of rigorous flight tests. For the first time, Allied pilots and engineers could study the Zero up close, to probe its strengths and, more importantly, to identify its weaknesses. The tests revealed what some American pilots had already discovered in the crucible of combat. The Zero's incredible maneuverability came at a cost. Its controls became heavy at high speeds, making it difficult to roll. Its engine, which lacked a supercharger, performed poorly at high altitudes. And its lightweight construction, the very thing that gave it its agility, also made it incredibly fragile. But perhaps the most critical discovery was the Zero's vulnerability in a dive. The American pilots found that by pushing the stick forward and entering a steep dive, they could easily escape a pursuing Zero. The Zero's carburetor was not designed for negative G maneuvers, and a steep dive would cause its engine to sputter and cut out. This knowledge, combined with the development of the thatch weave, gave American pilots a fighting chance. But a fighting chance was not enough. The Allies needed an aircraft that could take the fight to the Zero and win. That aircraft was the Grumman F6F Hellcat. The Hellcat was, in many ways, the antithesis of the Zero. It was not a graceful, lightweight dancer. It was a heavyweight brawler, a product of the Grumman Iron Works philosophy of building tough, durable aircraft. The Hellcat was designed with one primary objective: to be a Zero killer. Its development was directly influenced by the lessons learned from the Akutan Zero and the combat experiences of Wildcat pilots. The Hellcat was powered by a massive 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, the same engine that powered the Vought F4U Corsair and the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. This powerful engine gave the Hellcat a significant advantage in speed and climb rate over the Zero, especially at higher altitudes. The Hellcat was also heavily armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns that could unleash a devastating stream of fire. But perhaps the most important difference between the two aircraft was their design philosophy. The Zero was built for performance at all costs, sacrificing pilot protection for agility. The Hellcat, on the other hand, was built to survive. It featured a heavily armored cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks, and a rugged airframe that could absorb an astonishing amount of punishment. This emphasis on survivability meant that American pilots had a much better chance of returning home, even if their aircraft was damaged. It also meant that the U.S. Navy could retain its experienced pilots, a critical advantage in a long and brutal war of attrition. The Hellcat was not just a new aircraft, it was a new way of thinking about aerial combat. It was a machine that was designed not to outturn the Zero, but to overpower it, to use its superior speed, firepower, and durability to dictate the terms of the engagement. When the F6F Hellcat first entered service in late 1943, the pilots of the Imperial Japanese Navy were in for a rude awakening. The days of the Zero's unchallenged supremacy were numbered. A new king of the skies was about to be crowned. The first true test of the Hellcat's mettle came in the skies over the remote atoll of Tarawa in November 1943. It was here that the new American fighter would face the legendary Zero in a major engagement for the first time. The results were a harbinger of things to come. In a series of fierce dogfights, Hellcats shot down a claimed 30 Zeros for the loss of only one of their own. The lopsided victory was a stunning demonstration of the Hellcats' capabilities and a severe blow to the morale of the Japanese pilots. For the American pilots, it was a moment of vindication, a confirmation that they finally had a machine that could not only compete with the Zero, but could decisively defeat it. The Hellcat's success was not just due to its superior performance, it was also a testament to the new tactics that had been developed to exploit the Zero's weaknesses. American pilots were now trained to avoid turning dogfights with the Zero, instead using their Hellcat's superior speed and diving ability to make boom and zoom attacks. They would dive on a formation of Zeros from a higher altitude, make a firing pass, and then use their speed to climb back up to a safe altitude beyond the reach of the less powerful Japanese fighters. This tactic, combined with the thatch weave, proved to be a deadly combination. The Japanese pilots, accustomed to their opponents engaging them in turning battles where the Zero excelled, were often caught completely by surprise. As 1944 dawned, the tide of the Pacific War was turning. The industrial might of the United States was now in full swing, producing aircraft, ships, and trained pilots at a rate that Japan simply could not match. For every experienced Japanese pilot lost in combat, there was often only a hastily trained replacement to take their place. In contrast, the United States had a massive and well-organized pilot training program that was producing a steady stream of skilled and confident young aviators. The stage was now set for the largest carrier battle in history, a clash that would take place in the Philippine Sea and would forever be known by a grimly descriptive nickname. It was to be the ultimate showdown between the Zero and the Hellcat, a battle that would decide the fate of the Pacific Air War. The Japanese, desperate to halt the American advance across the Pacific, committed the bulk of their remaining carrier fleet to a decisive battle. They believed that their superior range and the skill of their veteran pilots would give them the edge. They were tragically mistaken. On June 19, 1944, the Japanese launched a series of massive airstrikes against the American fleet. But the Americans were ready. Their carriers were equipped with advanced radar that detected the approaching Japanese aircraft from a great distance, giving their Hellcat fighters ample time to scramble and intercept the enemy. What followed was not a battle, but a slaughter. The American pilots, flying their powerful Hellcats and employing their superior tactics, tore into the Japanese formations. The Zeros, now outdated and flown by many inexperienced pilots, were simply no match. They were shot down in droves, their fragile airframes erupting in flames as the Hellcat's 50 caliber bullets found their mark. One American pilot, Lieutenant Alexander Vrachu, famously shot down 6 Japanese dive bombers in just 8 minutes. By the end of the day, the Japanese had lost over 300 carrier aircraft, a catastrophic blow from which their naval air arm would never recover. The Americans, by contrast, had lost only a handful of planes in air-to-air combat. The battle was so one-sided that one American pilot was overheard to say, "Why hell, it was just like an old-time turkey shoot down home." The name stuck, and the Battle of the Philippine Sea would forever be remembered as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot was more than just a battle. It was the death knell of Japanese naval aviation. The loss of so many aircraft and, more importantly, so many experienced pilots was a blow from which the Imperial Japanese Navy could not recover. The Zero, once the terror of the Pacific, was now relegated to a secondary role, its shortcomings cruelly exposed by the new generation of American fighters. In the aftermath of the battle, the strategic situation in the Pacific was irrevocably altered. The Marianas Islands were now in American hands, providing crucial bases for the new long-range B-29 bombers that would soon begin their devastating raids on the Japanese home islands. The Hellcat had proven itself to be the undisputed master of the skies, achieving an incredible kill-to-loss ratio against the Zero. U.S. Navy and Marine F6F pilots flew over 66,000 combat sorties during the war and were credited with destroying over 5,100 enemy aircraft, more than any other Allied naval aircraft. But the story of the duel between the Zero and the Hellcat is not just a story of machines. It is a story of the men who flew them. For the Japanese pilots, the latter stages of the war were a period of desperation and despair. Stripped of their best aircraft and most experienced leaders, they were forced to resort to desperate measures. The rise of the kamikaze was a direct result of Japan's inability to compete with the overwhelming technological and numerical superiority of the Allies. Young, inexperienced pilots were sent on suicide missions, their Zeros, once the pride of the fleet, now reduced to little more than flying bombs. It was a tragic and brutal end for an aircraft that had once been the symbol of Japan's military might. For the American pilots, the Hellcat was more than just a weapon. It was a lifesaver. Men like Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, a Hellcat ace with 23 confirmed victories, spoke of the aircraft's ruggedness and reliability with a sense of awe and gratitude. The Hellcat's ability to absorb damage and bring its pilot home was a testament to the design philosophy of the Grumman Iron Works, a philosophy that placed a premium on the lives of the men who flew their aircraft. The legacy of the Zero and the Hellcat extends far beyond the confines of the Second World War. The Zero, with its emphasis on lightweight construction and maneuverability, was a brilliant but flawed design. It serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing performance over pilot protection. The Hellcat, on the other hand, with its powerful engine, heavy armament, and rugged construction, set the standard for a new generation of carrier-based fighters. It was an aircraft that was not just designed to fight, but to win, and to bring its pilots home safely. The duel between these two iconic aircraft was a microcosm of the larger conflict in the Pacific, a clash of cultures, technologies, and philosophies. It was a duel that was ultimately decided not just by the speed and agility of the aircraft, but by the industrial might, the tactical innovation, and the indomitable spirit of the nations that sent them into battle. As we look back on the epic duel between the Zero and the Hellcat, it is easy to get lost in the statistics, the kill ratios, and the technical specifications. But to truly understand the significance of this confrontation, we must remember the human cost. For every aircraft that fell from the sky, there was a pilot, a young man with a family, with hopes and with dreams. They were men who were caught up in the maelstrom of a global conflict, fighting for their countries and for their very survival. The story of the Zero and the Hellcat is a reminder of the incredible pace of technological change that is often driven by the necessities of war. In the span of just a few short years, the pendulum of air superiority swung dramatically, as one side's innovation was met and surpassed by the other's. It is also a story that highlights the importance of learning from one's mistakes. The early defeats suffered by the Allies at the hands of the Zero were a harsh but necessary lesson. They forced a re-evaluation of tactics, of aircraft design, and of pilot training. The result was a new generation of aircraft and a new generation of pilots that would ultimately prove to be victorious. But perhaps the most enduring lesson from the duel above the Pacific is the importance of balance. The Zero was a masterpiece of lightweight design, but its lack of protection made it a glass cannon. The Hellcat, while not as nimble, was a more balanced design, a machine that combined speed, firepower, and survivability in a package that proved to be a war winner. The skies over the Pacific are quiet now. The roar of radial engines has been replaced by the gentle whisper of the wind. But the legacy of the Zero and the Hellcat lives on, in the history books, in the museums, and in the memories of those who were there. Their story is a powerful testament to the courage, the ingenuity, and the sacrifice of a generation that fought and died in the greatest conflict in human history. We honor their memory by striving to learn from the past, to understand the forces that lead to conflict, and to work towards a future where such sacrifices are no longer necessary. The story of the Zero and the Hellcat is a rich and complex one, and there is always more to learn. I encourage you to delve deeper into the history of the Pacific Air War, to read the first-hand accounts of the pilots who fought in these epic battles, and to visit the museums that preserve these incredible machines. By doing so, we can ensure that the lessons of the past are not forgotten, and that the sacrifices of those who came before us are never taken for granted. If you have found this account of the duel between the Zero and the Hellcat to be informative and engaging, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more in-depth explorations of military history. And in the comments below, I would be interested to hear your thoughts. What other aspects of the Pacific Air War would you like to see us cover? What other great aerial duels from history capture your imagination? Your engagement helps us to continue to bring these important stories to a wider audience. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of one of the most pivotal aerial conflicts of the Second World War.